She found a key in the gutter on the coldest night of her life, covered in mud and rain, with no idea it would unlock the door to a man who had been searching for her for 20 years. The key was ordinary, rusted at the edges, attached to a leather strap so worn it barely held together. But when she picked it up, something inside her chest tightened, a feeling she couldn't name, a whisper from a past she didn't remember. Stay with me, because what happens next will break your heart wide open and then piece it back together in ways you never imagined. The rain fell in sheets that November evening, turning the streets of downtown into rivers of grey. She had been walking for hours, her shoes soaked through, her coat doing little to shield her from the biting wind. At 23 years old, she had learned to survive on scraps, on the kindness of strangers, on jobs that paid just enough to keep her in a cramped room above a laundromat. She had no family, no memories before the age of 3, only the faded knowledge that she had been found abandoned at a church steps with nothing but a small blanket and a name pinned to her chest. The world had not been gentle to her, but she had learned to carry her loneliness like a second skin, invisible to most, heavy only to her. That night she was returning from her shift at the diner, her pockets holding barely enough for bus fare, when she saw it. The key lay half-submerged in a puddle near the subway entrance, glinting under the streetlight like it was waiting for her. She almost walked past it. After all, what use did she have for someone else's key? But something made her stop. Something made her kneel down in the rain, her knees pressing into the cold concrete, and pick it up. The leather strap was engraved with initials she couldn't quite make out, worn smooth by time and touch. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the strange familiarity that made her pulse quicken. Why did it feel like she had held this before? She slipped the key into her pocket and continued home. But sleep didn't come that night. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where water stains formed maps of countries she would never visit, and she couldn't stop thinking about the key. Where had it come from? Who had dropped it? And why, in a city of millions, had she been the one to find it? These questions circled her mind like vultures, relentless and hungry. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would find out who it belonged to. The next morning, she examined the key more closely under the harsh fluorescent light of her room. The initials, though faded, began to reveal themselves when she wiped away the grime. The letters looked like they might be J and C, carved with care into the leather. She took a photo with her cracked phone screen and posted it to a local lost and found group online, describing where she had found it, hoping someone would claim it. She didn't expect what happened next. Within an hour, her phone began to buzz. Messages flooded in, but one stood out. It was from an account with no profile picture, just a simple message that made her hands shake. "Where exactly did you find this? Please, it's important. I've been looking for that key for a very long time." She replied with the intersection, and the response came back immediately. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th and Main tomorrow at noon. Please bring the key. I'll explain everything." She should have been cautious. She should have ignored the message, thrown the key away, moved on with her life. But desperation has a way of making people brave, and she was desperate for answers to questions she had carried her entire life. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had she been abandoned? Maybe, just maybe, this key was a thread that could lead her somewhere, anywhere, other than the emptiness she had always known. The cafe was modest, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of place where people went to disappear into their laptops and lattes. She arrived early, her heart hammering against her ribs, the key burning like a coal in her jacket pocket. She ordered a black coffee she couldn't afford and sat by the window watching every person who walked through the door. And then he entered. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing a coat that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples, his face carved with the kind of lines that come from sleepless nights and heavy decisions. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were the same shade as hers, a deep hazel flecked with gold, the kind of eyes you don't see often. He scanned the cafe, and when his gaze landed on her, he froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. He walked toward her slowly, as if she might vanish if he moved too quickly, and when he reached her table, his voice cracked when he spoke. You found it. After all these years, you found it. She didn't understand. She pulled the key from her pocket and placed it on the table between them, and when he saw it, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. I've been searching for this key my entire adult life, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But more than that, I've been searching for you. The words hit her like a wave, stealing the air from her lungs. She shook her head, confusion and fear tangling in her chest. I don't understand. I don't know you. He reached across the table, not touching her, just letting his hand rest near hers, a gesture of connection without pressure. My name is Jonathan Cross. I'm the CEO of Cross Industries, and 20 years ago I lost the most important person in my life. My daughter. She was 3 years old. Her name was Emma. The room tilted. The noise of the cafe faded into a distant hum. She felt like she was falling even though she was sitting perfectly still. That's my name, she whispered. They found me with that name pinned to my clothes. He nodded, a tear sliding down his cheek. I know, because I'm the one who put it there. The confession hung in the air between them like smoke, thick and suffocating. She stared at him, at this stranger who claimed to be her father, and felt the ground beneath her shift. How could this be real? How could the man sitting across from her, with his expensive coat and his corporate empire, be connected to the frightened child left on church steps 2 decades ago? Her mind raced through every possibility, every scenario that might make sense, but none of them felt right. None of them explained the ache in her chest or the way his eyes seemed to hold a grief so profound it could drown oceans. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He sat there, patient and broken, waiting for her to speak, to scream, to run. But she did none of those things. Instead, she picked up the key, turning it over in her palm, feeling its weight anchor her to this impossible moment. If you're my father, she said slowly, each word careful and measured, then why did you leave me? Why did you let me grow up alone, thinking I was unwanted, unloved? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated herself for it, for showing weakness to someone who might be lying, who might be using her for reasons she couldn't fathom. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again they were filled with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. I didn't leave you by choice, he began, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. I was forced to make an impossible decision, the kind that destroys you no matter what you choose. Your mother, she died when you were 2 years old. Car accident, sudden, senseless. After that, I was all you had, and you were all I had. But I had enemies, powerful people who wanted to destroy me, who threatened to hurt you to get to me. I received a letter one day, explicit and terrifying, detailing exactly how they would take you, hurt you, use you as leverage to take everything I had built. She wanted to interrupt, to call him a liar, to demand proof, but something in his voice stopped her. There was a truth in his brokenness that couldn't be faked. He continued, pulling a worn envelope from his coat pocket and placing it on the table. I went to the police, to private security, to everyone I could think of, but they told me the same thing. These people were connected, untouchable, and the only way to keep you safe was to make you disappear, to erase your connection to me. So I made a choice that has haunted me every single day since. I took you to that church in the middle of the night. I pinned your name to your clothes, along with a note begging whoever found you to love you the way I couldn't protect you to love you. And I left this key with you, hidden in the lining of your blanket, hoping that someday, somehow, it would lead you back to me. Her hands were shaking now, the key slipping slightly in her grip. Why this key? What does it open? He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small photograph, faded and creased from being carried for years. It showed a younger version of him holding a tiny girl with wild curls and those same hazel eyes. They were standing in front of a house, modest but beautiful, with a red door and flower boxes in the windows. This was our home, he said softly, before everything fell apart. I kept it all these years exactly as it was the day I took you away. The key opens that red door. I couldn't bring myself to sell it, to let go of the only place where we had been happy together. I've gone there every year on your birthday, hoping, praying that somehow you would find your way back." Tears blurred her vision, hot and unexpected. She had spent her entire life building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was better off alone. But here was a man who had carried her memory like a wound, who had preserved a home for a daughter who might never return. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate scheme?" He smiled sadly, understanding her doubt. "You don't. Not yet. But I can show you. The house is still there, 30 minutes outside the city. Come with me. See it for yourself. If you don't believe me after that, I'll walk away. I'll never contact you again. But please give me this one chance to prove that I've been searching for you every day since I let you go." She should have said no. Every rational part of her brain screamed danger, warned her that this could be a trap, a manipulation. But the irrational part, the part that had always wondered where she came from, who had wanted her, that part was louder. She nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm driving myself. I'll follow you there." He agreed without hesitation, relief washing over his features like sunrise after an endless night. The drive took them out of the city and into the countryside, where trees lined the roads and houses sat far apart from each other. She followed his black sedan in her beat-up Honda, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her mind a storm of emotions. What if he was telling the truth? What if she really had a father who had loved her, who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe? What if she had spent her entire life alone when she didn't have to be? They pulled up to a house that looked exactly like the one in the photograph. The red door was faded now, the flower boxes empty, but it was unmistakably the same place. He got out of his car and waited for her, not approaching until she was ready. She climbed out slowly, the key clutched in her fist, and walked toward the door like she was approaching the edge of a cliff. He gestured for her to use the key, and with trembling hands, she slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The door swung open. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Toys were scattered on the floor, a child's drawings hung on the refrigerator. Photos of her as a baby covered every surface. It was a shrine to a life interrupted, a love that had never died. She walked through the rooms in a daze, touching the furniture, the walls, trying to remember anything, any fragment of memory that might connect her to this place. And then she saw it. In the corner of the living room, a small rocking chair with her name carved into the back. Not just her first name, but her full name, the one she had never known she had, the one that made her his daughter beyond any doubt. Sharing stories like these isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of hidden connections, of love that transcends time and circumstance, subscribe and join us. Your like can spread empathy, and your comment might share a story that touches another soul. Because these moments, these revelations that change everything, they remind us that we're never as alone as we think we are. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in 20 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had been wanted all along. The silence in that house was different from any silence she had ever known. It wasn't empty or hollow like the silence of her lonely apartment. It was full, heavy with memories that weren't hers, but somehow belonged to her anyway. She stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by remnants of a childhood she couldn't remember, and felt something inside her crack open. Not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked for so long she had forgotten it was even there. He stood in the doorway, giving her space, watching her with eyes that held both hope and terror, afraid that at any moment she might bolt, might reject this truth that he had carried alone for 2 decades. She walked to the mantel where photographs lined up like soldiers standing guard over the past. There she was, a toddler with wild curls and a gap-toothed smile sitting on his shoulders. There they were at a park, feeding ducks. There was another of her sleeping in his arms, so small and trusting. Each image was a piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. "I don't remember any of this," she whispered, her fingers hovering over a frame. "I've tried my whole life to remember something, anything before the church, but there's nothing, just darkness." He stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. "That's normal," he said gently. "You were so young. Most people don't retain memories from that age, but I remember everything. Your first word was bird. You were obsessed with them, would point at the sky every time one flew past. You loved strawberries but hated blueberries. You had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hop that you couldn't sleep without. Something flickered in her mind, not quite a memory but an echo of one. A soft texture against her cheek, the smell of something sweet, a feeling of safety. Mr. Hop, she repeated, and the name felt right on her tongue, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. He nodded, his eyes brightening. I looked everywhere for him before I took you to the church. I wanted you to have him, but he was lost somewhere in the chaos of those final days. It's one of my greatest regrets, that I couldn't give you that one piece of comfort. She turned to face him fully, studying his features, looking for herself in him. The eyes were obvious, but there was more. The shape of her nose, the way her mouth curved, the stubborn set of her jaw. She was looking at a map of her own face, drawn in time and experience. You said you had enemies, she said, her voice stronger now. Are they still out there? Am I still in danger? The question hung between them like a blade. He shook his head slowly. No. It took years, but I dismantled them piece by piece. I built my company into something powerful enough to protect what mattered. I used every resource, every connection, every ounce of influence I gained to track them down and ensure they could never hurt anyone again. Some went to prison, others destroyed themselves. By the time you were 10, they were gone. But by then, you had vanished completely. What do you mean vanished? She asked, confusion crossing her features. He moved to sit on the couch, gesturing for her to join him. She hesitated, then sat on the opposite end, maintaining distance, but not fleeing. I hired investigators, he explained. The best I could find. I knew which church I had left you at, but when I went back 2 years later, after I had eliminated the threats, you were gone. The church had closed. Records were scattered or lost. I spent 15 years following dead ends, tracking foster homes and adoption agencies, searching through databases and hiring people to search through more databases. I found hundreds of girls named Emma who were the right age, but none of them were you. It was like you had disappeared into thin air. She thought about her own childhood, the foster homes that had cycled her through like unwanted baggage, the group homes where she had learned to fight and steal and survive. I was in the system, she said quietly, but they never kept good records. I moved around so much, different counties, different states for a while. I aged out at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a bus ticket to nowhere. His face contorted with pain. If I had known, if I had found you sooner, I could have given you everything, a home, an education, a family. You wouldn't have had to suffer. She felt anger flare in her chest, hot and righteous. But I did suffer. I went hungry. I slept in shelters. I learned that the world doesn't care about girls like me, girls with no one to protect them. Where were you then? He didn't flinch from her anger. He absorbed it, accepted it, let it wash over him like penance. I was looking, he said simply. Every day I was looking. But I failed you. I know that. I made a choice that I thought would save your life, and instead it condemned you to a childhood of hardship. I can't take that back. I can't give you those years. But I can tell you that not a single day passed when I didn't think about you, when I didn't wonder if you were safe, if you were happy, if you were alive. Tears ran down his face unchecked, and she realized this man, this powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms and built empires, was completely undone by her presence. She felt her anger soften, not disappear, but transform into something more complex. Grief for what was lost, confusion about what came next, and underneath it all, a tiny seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone anymore. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Do you expect me to just accept this? To call you Dad and pretend like the last 20 years didn't happen? He shook his head. No, I don't expect anything from you. You owe me nothing. But I'm asking, begging really, for a chance to know you, to be in your life in whatever capacity you'll allow. If you want to walk out that door right now and never see me again, I'll understand. But if you're willing to try, even just a little, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost. She looked around the room again, at this museum of love preserved in amber, and felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She thought about the key, about how it had found its way to her on the coldest night of her life, about how improbable and impossible this whole situation was. And yet, here they were. Two people broken by the same wound, finally in the same room after 20 years of searching in the dark. "I need time," she said finally. "This is too much to process all at once. I need to think, to figure out what this means." He nodded, relief evident in his features. "Take all the time you need. But please, let me give you this." He pulled a card from his wallet and handed it to her. It had his personal cell phone number written on it. "Call me any time, day or night, even if it's just to yell at me or ask questions or sit in silence. I'll be here." She took the card, slipping it into her pocket next to the key. "Okay," she whispered. They sat there for a while longer, not speaking, just existing in the same space. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she might actually belong somewhere. If you've ever felt the pull of connections that transcend time, if you've ever wondered about the paths not taken and the people you've lost, stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, because these stories of redemption and reunion remind us that it's never too late for love to find its way home. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, keeps hope burning for those still searching. The weeks that followed were strange and fragile, like learning to walk on ice. She didn't move into his mansion or quit her job at the diner or suddenly transform into the daughter of a CEO. She continued living in her cramped room above the laundromat, continued serving coffee to strangers, continued existing in the world she had built for herself. But now there were phone calls, short at first, awkward silences punctuated by careful questions. He would ask about her day, and she would give minimal answers. She would ask about his childhood, and he would share stories that painted a picture of a man who had worked his way up from nothing, who understood struggle in ways that surprised her. Slowly, incrementally, they began to build a bridge across the chasm of lost years. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. When she agreed to meet him for coffee, he showed up 15 minutes early and stayed as long as she wanted. When she mentioned struggling with her rent, money appeared in her account with a simple text that read, "Not charity, just back payment for 20 birthdays I missed." She wanted to refuse it, to send it back, to prove she didn't need him. But pride is expensive, and survival has taught her to accept help when it comes from genuine places. So she kept the money and used it to fix her car, to buy groceries that weren't expired, to breathe a little easier for the first time in years. One evening, 3 months after she had found the key, he invited her to dinner at the house with the red door. Not his current home, but the one that held their history. He had arranged for it to be cleaned, for the utilities to be turned back on, and when she arrived, the smell of home-cooked food greeted her. He had learned to cook her favorite meals from memory, recreating dishes her mother used to make. Chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes with too much butter, green beans that were slightly overcooked because that's how she had liked them as a child. She sat at the table in a chair that had once held a booster seat and felt something inside her settle. "I've been thinking," he said as they ate, his voice careful, "about what comes next. I know you value your independence and I respect that. But I want to offer you something, not as a father trying to control your life, but as someone who wants to see you thrive." She looked up from her plate, guarded but curious. "What kind of offer?" He set down his fork, meeting her eyes with an intensity that reminded her they shared the same blood. "I want to give you a position at my company. Not some meaningless title or fake job, but real work. You're smart, resourceful, you've survived things that would have broken most people. Those are exactly the qualities I need in my organization. Start in any department you want. Learn the business, and if you decide it's not for you, walk away. No strings attached." She felt a familiar resistance rise in her chest, the voice that whispered she wasn't good enough, that she would fail, that people like her didn't belong in glass towers and boardrooms. But another voice, quieter but growing stronger, asked a different question. Why not? Why shouldn't she have the opportunities that had been stolen from her? Why shouldn't she take what was being offered and build something from it? "I don't have a college degree," she said, testing him. "I barely finished high school. He smiled, and in that smile she saw pride. Neither did I when I started. Education comes in many forms. You've earned a degree in survival, and that's more valuable than any piece of paper. Say yes. Give yourself a chance. She thought about the key in her pocket, the one she carried everywhere now like a talisman. It had unlocked more than just a door. It had unlocked a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'll try." The relief and joy on his face was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this chance." And she realized that she wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for him too, for the man who had carried guilt and grief for 20 years, who had never stopped searching, who had preserved a home and a hope that most people would have abandoned. The transition wasn't easy. Her first day at the company, she felt like an imposter walking through those gleaming halls, surrounded by people in expensive suits with advanced degrees. But he had assigned her a mentor, a woman named Sarah, who had also come from nothing and worked her way up. Sarah didn't coddle her or make excuses for her lack of experience. She challenged her, pushed her, gave her real projects with real consequences, and she discovered something surprising. She was good at this, the same skills that had helped her navigate the chaos of poverty, the ability to read people, to solve problems with limited resources, to think creatively under pressure. Those skills translated into business in ways she hadn't expected. Months turned into a year. She moved out of the laundromat apartment and into a modest place closer to the office. She enrolled in night classes to fill the gaps in her education. She had dinner with him once a week, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at the house with the red door, sometimes at his current home where she slowly became comfortable. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her stories about her mother, about their love story, about the woman she had come from. She told him about her hardest years, the things she had done to survive, the parts of herself she was ashamed of. And he listened without judgment, absorbing every piece of her story like it was sacred. One night, sitting on the porch of the red door house as fireflies danced in the summer air, she finally said the word she had been holding back. "Dad," she said quietly, testing how it felt on her tongue. He turned to her, his eyes glistening. "Yes?" She smiled, and it was genuine, reaching all the way to her eyes. "Thank you. For never giving up, for keeping this place, for finding me even when I was lost." He pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in her memory, she let herself be held by someone who loved her unconditionally. "I would have searched forever," he whispered into her hair. "You were always worth finding." The key that had brought them together now hung on a chain around her neck, a reminder that sometimes the things we find in the gutter, in the darkest moments of our lives, are actually the keys to everything we've been searching for. That love doesn't die just because it's separated. That family isn't always about blood, but about the people who refuse to forget you, who carry you in their hearts through decades of silence and searching. And that it's never, ever too late for a story to find its happy ending. This was the journey of one soul, but so many others wait to be told. If you've ever felt the pain of lost connections or the joy of reunion, join our community. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe even your own story. Together, we celebrate the essence of life and the bonds that unite us, because in the end we all carry keys to doors we haven't found yet, and sometimes the person searching for us is just waiting for us to pick up what was meant to be ours all along. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like if this story touched your heart, and remember that your engagement helps these stories reach people who need to hear them most. Thank you for being here, for feeling deeply, for believing that love always finds a way home.